Greetings, YouTube. So I read something recently, it's a medical report, that has come forth with data that supports the idea that psychological abuse, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, is as severe and potentially more severe than some of the abuses that survivors have put up with when it comes to physical or sexual abuse. And those of us who have suffered emotional abuse, psychological abuse, will tell you, duh. Now, I'm not going to compare abuse. I'm not going to say that one type of abuse is worse than the other. It's all bad. But I think that emotional abuse has been given short shift. It really has. It's been downplayed a lot of the time, and people have just tended to treat it as a side issue. It's kind of like they say, okay, the person was physically and sexually abused, and they've suffered emotional damage. And that's true. Don't get me wrong. But emotional abuse in and of itself is harmful. Words can hit as hard as blows. And they can be key in coming up with any number of problems that will then plague a survivor of emotional abuse in later life, anxiety and depression being the two most common. I suffer from anxiety and depression. My depression is clinical depression. It's like a genetic trait. My grandfather had it. My father has it. I'm sure that my great-grandfather had it. I come from a long line of depressed alcoholics. I'm not alcoholic. I never have been alcoholic. I gave up alcohol at 22 when I realized that I was walking down that path. But the emotional abuse that I survived as a child is horrible. It was scarring. It was as bad as the things I survived physically from my home or sexually from my predation by two individuals outside my family. And it's hard sometimes to sum up what that meant. In my home, my father told me either directly or through his actions or lack of or his lack of encouragement and such, that I was stupid. He told me this all the time. He made it evidently clear that I was not smart. Now, the reason he did this is my father had self-esteem issues and had problems with his own worth, and he judged himself poorly. And that fueled his alcoholism, besides the fact he'd come from a home of physical abuse and emotional abuse, living with an alcoholic, abusive father. My grandfather could be a right bastard. And it also fueled, interestingly, his reading. He still reads, not quite obsessively, but unendingly. And when I was a youth, he would keep 3x5 cards, little notes, like a synopsis of each book he read, as though it was proof, as though it was evidence that he acquired that book, that somehow he was showing someone who was only in his head that he knew something. Now he just tends to read for pleasure. He reads a lot of westerns and espionage. There's a lot of contemporary dramas, fiction, things like that. But he was trying to prove something. And one of the ways that a person who is emotionally unstable, who has psychological problems, can try to prove to themselves that they're better is by trying to prove that someone is worse. They make themselves taller by standing on someone else. And in my dynamic, in my home, that someone was me. By belittling my intelligence, he made himself feel better. Now, I understand now why he was doing it. I grasp that. I don't hold it against him. He was a product of the damage he suffered from his own household and the damage he'd done to himself with alcohol. And being an active alcoholic during my entire childhood, he didn't stop drinking until it was in my late 20s. He just, in many ways, he just couldn't help it. And he doesn't remember. So being upset about it now is kind of pointless, not worth it. But the emotional abuse and neglect was real and evident, and it was deeply painful. And it took me a long time and a lot of reading on my own and the help of my therapist, Stephen, to get where I am now. And I really appreciate Stephen's help. I think I'm beginning to get near the end of my therapy. And I couldn't have gotten here without Stephen. He has been my friend and savior. He has been my guide to show me the path I had to walk. I had to do the walking. I had to do the work. But he showed me the path was there. He showed me that the path was possible. And that right there is a beautiful thing. It truly is. So, I'm doing better now than I was. But I don't want anyone to ever forget that what we survived was real. That the emotional abuse that we put up with, that the emotional neglect we survived, had an impact. It wasn't something to be dismissed. It wasn't something to be ignored. It wasn't something as it was an ancillary, collateral damage to the other things that we lived through. That in and of itself was devastating, and toxic, and serious, and tragic. And we can't ignore it. But we can overcome it. We can move beyond it. Never forgetting, never dismissing it, never downplaying because it was serious then and it's serious now. But we can put it in its place. We can put it into the book that is our past, where it belongs. And we can learn from it. We can show the book to others that they can learn from it. But we are not a slave to it. We are better than that. We are more than that. We always were. And we always will be. So go read the article. It's not all that particularly long, and I thought it was quite interesting. And it's heartening. It's encouraging. It's nice to see people give an issue that you've always considered to be of great import the kind of weight and gravitas that it should have always deserved. So, happy holidays.